talking about analytics. Looked at Maryland's 5 games from a year ago and 3 games this year. I did not include the game with Howard. As you know, that was 62-0. No reason to consider that game. But there were 4 parameters that stood out. I'll tell you what they were now, since the game's over with. I don't know that we won them all. I don't think we won all. I know we didn't win one of them. I know we didn't win 2 of them, actually, amazingly enough. The team with any edge in defensive sacks up until tonight won 100% of the time. Now, I don't know who won on sacks or not. It was pretty even, I think. And I don't know if we have that information yet, but
I do not. I don't have the final box score yet.
This one I know we didn't win. And the funny part about it, the team with any edge in first quarter scoring had won 100% of the time. I was hoping as the last of the first quarter snaps wound down, we were going to score on the last play of the first quarter. As it turned out, we did not win the first quarter, and yet we scored on the first play of the second quarter. So we were 1 play late.
Yeah.
And so officially, Maryland won the first quarter. I think I'd like to take a little bit of literary license there and go ahead and move that first play of the second quarter to consider it as a first quarter play. Of course, you've heard us say that second quarter is the most important quarter, and it really does help if you maybe make it 31-0 in the second quarter. Just incredible. 7 turnovers, is that right? I think that was the final. 6 picks.
Yes. Yeah, 6 picks. Yep, you're correct.
And did we ever turn it over? We had a couple that were – we had, of course, they made a really nice play on Kerner with his interception. Great job of spiking the ball out on the part of the Maryland player, but an even greater job by Belton to get the ball back. I don't know how he got it back, honestly.
We could talk about that, Don, but as I'm watching that, I'm thinking I saw no way that those officials were going to call it Iowa ball, but they saw something we didn't because he had one arm in there, and he must have – I mean, he was going 1-on-4 as far as his arms are concerned.
Yeah, it looked like there were at least a couple of Maryland players that had a much better chance than he did, and yet somehow Dane got it back. So good for him. First touchdown of the game, of course, went to Maryland. The team that scored the first touchdown up until now had won 88% of the time, 7 wins and 1 loss.
Wow. And
the team, we knew this one was going to be important. The team with more explosive plays had also won 88% of the time. I suspect we won that.
I would think so.
Yeah. Not that we had a bunch of home runs, but we had a lot of 20-somethings, I think.
Yeah.
Quite a few. So the last message I sent to Kirk and wishing him good luck for the game, and I said, just one simple reminder, start fast. That was a quote. And I said, if you start fast, at some point they'll give up. And I think we reached that point tonight. And you could argue when that was, but some people would argue it was sometime during the second quarter. You might argue, if you're a loyal Maryland fan, you might argue that it happened later in the game, but it definitely happened.
Don, let me revert back just for a moment. I'll be honest, and this is the pessimistic fan in me. When Maryland marched down the field in 8 plays in that first quarter and scored, I thought, uh-oh, this is going to be a long day. And, you know, who would have thought from then on Iowa would just dominate the game? Were you concerned after watching how Maryland kind of methodically, you know, gained 15, 20 yards of play, it seemed like, on that first drive?
That was a nice drive. It was a legitimate drive. You remember the thing? I wrote it down in my notes as it was played out. Here's a quote. Tagovailoa is doing a good job of throwing into the soft spots of our zone defense. Our safeties were playing with a lot of depth. I think they were just being cautious in the early stages of the game, and they were hitting in routes or digs, as we call them, up in front of them. But they were you know, good gainers, 15 yards or so on average probably, and they just methodically went down the field and played well. But we adjusted. You know, we started playing with a little more confidence, I think, as we sized them up a little bit. We thought we could go ahead and tighten that zone down a little bit. And, of course, I think our pass rush improved as the game went on. And obviously that score kept changing, so that puts a little extra pressure on the Maryland offense because they realized we got to try to somehow match scores And it wasn't all the defense's fault. It did help a lot that we ran the ball with pretty good consistency, even in the early stages of the game. I remember, I think after one quarter, we had a better average per snap on run than we did pass. We were averaging 5 yards a pop on run, I think, and about 4 at the time on pass. Early in the game, you might remember Spencer, the one thing he failed to do in the early stages of the game, lots of route versus tight coverage, lots of routes, I should say, versus tight coverage. And he had a tendency, if you're throwing against tight coverage, man coverage we're talking about, the ball has to be way out in front. The receivers have to understand, I'm going to have to really extend for this ball because there's a guy right on my backside, and we have to keep him there. And the only way to do it, of course, is to continue to run fast or even accelerate more in going forward. Keep the ball in front. A couple of those early throws were on the backside, easy to break them up. But I thought Spencer adjusted, and from that point forward, he did put the ball out in front, and we had good results with that. That was all good to see, of course. Great play by Campbell to get the ball tipped. It shows a lot of range on his part. Again, just good awareness of where the quarterback's about to throw the football. Just got a finger on it. That's all it takes sometimes to change the flight of the ball. And it's just wonderful. There were so many good plays. I will say this, if I'm a Maryland fan, I really do feel like the loss of Demas is a huge setback. To my knowledge, he never came back, right? I'm pretty sure he didn't, even though he was telling the fans he was going to be back. That was wishful on his part, because he is, if I had to pick one player as the most valuable player, I guess you'd have to pick the quarterback, but next to him, you'd have to pick Demas. Outstanding receiver. If he's not back next week for them, that'll be another setback for him. And it's unfortunate for him that he went down with an injury tonight, but as we all know, that's part of the game.
Don, you obviously have an extensive history of seeing players with gruesome injuries. How bad was that from your perspective? Does that make, I mean, it's hard for me to watch.
Yeah, it didn't look good. It didn't look good. The tough thing to realize, what players, if you get stood up through whatever series of events, if you get stood up, now you're vulnerable. So that's why it's so important when you're advancing the ball down the field. You know, you need to have good body lean going forward. You need to have your pads down, of course. And now you're not as likely to get stood up. And that's what happened. He got pinched in between two players, and it didn't look good. I don't know what the injury was, but I'd be very surprised if he's back playing next week.
Yeah, that was just saying. It was a huge point in the game, Don, not just because the fact that he left, but momentum. You know, Iowa had taken the lead, and then, of course, an incredibly short field, which Iowa just seems to have a knack at getting, whether it be because of the punt game or because of turnovers. And now this was, of course, a special teams prompted turnover. And give credit to, I don't know who it was that knocked it out on that play, but the injury, like you said, is part of the game. It was hard to watch, but it was the right call. The ball was out early. And it just spiraled after that, Don.
Yeah, I liked how hungry we were, and we stayed hungry. Good example, the touchdown to make our lead 24-7. At the time, I remember thinking, field goal is no good here. We need another touchdown because now we're up by 17. And as you know, that's the kind of margin you're looking for because that requires 3 scores. At the time, you felt, what else could we hope for but a 17-point lead at this point in the game? Of course, that lead continued to expand as that second quarter wound down. But here's a great interception. I made a note. Belton ran the route better than the Maryland receiver did. It looked like Belton was the primary receiver because he undercut the route, and he actually, of course, the quarterback's trying to think, how did he somehow get in front of my receiver? Because I thought that was the path my receiver was going to take. You got to blame the receiver for allowing Belton to get position on him. But you got to credit Belton, too, for being able to do that. To be able to work underneath the receiver matters a lot. Best first half in a long time. That's my comment. Complete on both sides of the ball. I thought Spencer certainly played maybe his best game ever, certainly one of his best. Again, just because he didn't make any big mistakes. He's off on a throw here and there. Shame on Maryland for taking forever to figure out how to defend the naked. I'll give them a clue. We're going to fake to the left and roll to the right. Yes. But it took them a while to figure that out. They finally figured it out in the fourth quarter. Of course, by then we were doing it with our backup quarterback. And they'd seen it too many times to count. I made a comment here. Tyler Goodson is having himself a game that didn't show up in great numbers, but that was one of the best 7-yard runs I've ever seen in my life. You might remember the play. They talked about it.
The kind of the stop and go and then the juke left.
Yeah. That was an incredible move on his part. That's highlight reel stuff. You know, it's only a 7-yard gain, but it should have been minus something, maybe minus 3 or 4. And of course, the nice play on the pass. Beat the linebacker, that's one thing, but then the safety just gets juked out of his shoes.
Oh, man, alive.
Yeah. So many heroes in this game. Great catch by Charlie Jones. That was a replay of Reganey, right? Same play. I made this comment. One team lost their poise and one team did not. And let's just think back to the early stages of the game. 3rd and short, false start means 3rd and 6. Happened a second time, and I think it even happened a third time. One time the center was so confounded, he actually snapped the ball early, and he realized he was snapping it early, and then he stopped. But by then, of course, it's a foul.
And Don, let me interject here, because that brings up the first point that I had noted about Maryland was lack of discipline, false start on 4th and 1 on the very first drive. And it really did. It set the tone early, and they just never were able to really recover from those penalties.
Yeah. You know, sometimes scores are hard to explain. Nobody predicted this was going to be a one-sided game. It caused me to flash back to 1985 again. We talk about 85 every now and then. But you'll remember this. I'll ask it this way, Corey. Do you remember what happened the week after we lost to Ohio State?
Well, I would have to remember on replay because I was not alive yet, Don, so tell me.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what happened. We were disappointed, of course, because we'd been the #1 team for, I think, 5 weeks maybe. And we lost a heartbreaker to Ohio State. The next game happened to be in Kinnick. It happened to be against a very good Illinois team that ended up going to a bowl game that year. But the halftime score in that game was 49-0. Now, how do you explain 49-0 against another bowl team? And let's face it, Maryland's got a chance certainly to be a bowl team also. They probably will.
Yeah.
Although if they do miss Demas for the year, that's a setback. They're going to miss him. But we shouldn't feel too sorry for them because they have other good athletes that'll give a good account of themselves. Maybe not play as well as Demas, I think, but still play well enough to contribute to a win. So nobody would have predicted a one-sided game tonight, and no one predicted one back in 1985 either against a good Illinois team.